today's webinar, Hackers and the Human Factor. I'm your moderator, James Baker, Managing Partner of the Public Sector Technology Exchange. I want to thank everyone from around the country for joining us to what I believe is going to be a very riveting and thought-provoking discussion. For those of you that are not familiar with the Public Sector Technology Exchange, we're an independent forum, and we discuss the technology challenges impacting government, industry, and education. You can learn more about us on the web or in your favorite social media venue. Before we get started today, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. Today's webinar will be recorded. I will send all registrants out an on-demand link to watch this via YouTube early next week. Kindly mute any phones or computers. Your questions are important. During the registration process over the last month, we received a multitude of questions coming in from all over the country. We'll try to get to those. Also, during the question and answer portion of this event at the end, we'll open it up to you, the audience, and you can submit your questions to me through the dashboard. In the event we don't get to your questions, we'll make sure to follow up with you post-event. Lastly, at the end of this webinar, I'm going to ask you to fill out a survey. As you can imagine, an event like this takes a great deal of planning and time to put together, and we'd love to hear what you think about it. Today's event would not have been made possible without our sponsor, Proofpoint. I encourage everyone listening in across the country to download the Proofpoint Cybercrime Report. Attackers prey on human behaviors. I will tell you this document will change the way you see many, many things in your organization. The web address is on your screen, and I encourage everyone to download that now. I am very excited. We have an all-star lineup of technology experts from government, industry, and higher education joining us today from all over the country. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. We'll go ahead and start with Jim Garrett. Jim.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Garrett. I'm the Enterprise Chief Information Security Officer for New York State. I am fairly new to this position. I've been in this role for about 3 months now, and it is a very exciting role to be in. It's a complex environment supporting many agencies and all the regulations that those agencies have. Prior to New York State, I was the Chief Information Security Officer for 3M, Ingram Micro, Allied Signal, Honeywell, and Washington Mutual. So I have some broad experience across different disciplines, and I'm very happy to be here and be part of the panel.
Thank you, Jim. We're glad to have you. Now from Memphis, Tennessee, Brent, if you could introduce yourself.
Hey, Jim. Good morning. I'm Brent Nair. I'm the Chief Information, and I also wear the hat of Chief Information Security Officer for the city of Memphis. Thanks for having us.
Glad that you're on the panel with us. We're going to head over to Missouri. Michael, if you'd introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. My name is Mike Rolling. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Missouri. We have approximately 40,000 employees, about 30 different agencies, and we support about 6 million citizens. I've been in this current role as CISO since 2009, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Thank you, Michael. Going to head over to Sacramento, California. Stephanie Cervantes. Stephanie, if you could introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Hi, Jimmy. This is Stephanie Cervantes. I'm the Security and Privacy Strategist for LinkSource Technologies. I've been with them about 6 months now. Before retiring from the state of California and joining the private sector, I spent 20+ years in the security and privacy realms of California state government, where I founded the State Interagency Security Group and chaired that for 19 years. Some of the highlights of my career were creating a privacy office for one of the 3 taxing entities, revamping an aging information security program, serving as a Chief Information Security Officer, setting up and managing security quality assurance for a couple of large ERPs for California, served as a state rep on a lot of policies that we were doing, chief security architect for a largest pension fund in the world in the public sector. I managed the IT security office and did testing. The last of my career I spent as the Chief IT Security Officer, California Department of Justice, one of the largest public law firms and law enforcement entities. I also serve on the advisory board for the Sacramento chapter of InfraGard and have been a founding member there, and I sit on an advisory board capacity for a security company in the Silicon Valley. So I'm very anxious about today's panel, very excited about it, and I think it's going to be a good discussion.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now we're just going to go slightly up the interstate to Monterey County. Dan, could you kindly introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, good day to all of you. My name is Dan Kern, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Monterey County, and where it is currently 73 degrees. Thanks for having me here.
Way to rub the great temperature we have out here in California, and for everyone that's freezing in the country today. We're now going to take a shift, and we're going to go 3,000 miles the other direction out to Delaware. Elaine, could you introduce yourself to the panel, please?
Good morning or good afternoon to the audience, depending on where you are. Yeah, it's a cloudy 45 degrees here in Dover, Delaware, and I'm very happy to be part of this panel. I am the Chief Security Officer for state government. I'm responsible for the enterprise-wide protection of all of our assets from high consequence events. I'm responsible for the statewide security program, as well as disaster recovery, continuity of operations as well. So I'm happy to be part of the panel.
Thank you. We're glad to have you. Now we're going to slightly go up the coast there on the east. And Sabina, if you could introduce yourself, please, to the audience.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. This is Sabina Sataru from the city of Hartford, Chief Information Officer, or Chief Innovation Officer. Actually, as of Monday, our name for our department was just changed to Metro Hartford Innovation Services. So we've got a new modern name here. We support both the Hartford Public Schools and the city of Hartford for all their IT needs and security. And I've been with the city about 20 years, 3 years in the current role, and it's 52 degrees here in balmy Hartford, Connecticut.
All right. Patrick with Proofpoint. Patrick, could you kindly introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Sure, yes. Thank you. I'm Patrick Wheeler, Director of Threat Intelligence and Communications at Proofpoint. Among other things, I was a lead author on our recently published Human Factor Report, which Jim mentioned. Really excited to talk with you all today. I've been in information security in a variety of roles for 16 years now, and I think it's constantly challenging, constantly interesting, and looking forward to hearing, I guess, the comments and questions that come up today.
Thank you, Patrick. We're going to go down to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, which I think is coined the happiest place in America. But Bill, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Certainly, because I'm sitting here very happily waiting to get in and engage. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate today. I have two hats at Cal Poly. I'm the director of the Cybersecurity Center, where we're trying to focus the minds of 18 to 21-year-olds on cybersecurity, or more likely try to focus them on the good side of cybersecurity, if you will, and how that correlates to the world in front of us. And I'm also the CIO for the university. We've done that on purpose because there's such a correlation between the IT world and the cybersecurity world, and then to be able to draw from the university at large. Prior to that, I've done military experience, government experience, Beltway Patriot experience, and been in this line of work for the last 30+ years. So looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say.
Well, and Bill, if you'll hold tight, go ahead. We're going to go to the portion of the event where I'm going to interview each of our panelists. When I get done interviewing the panelists, we'll then open it up to you, the audience. And I already see that we have a handful of questions coming in that we'll try to get to. But my first question is for Bill. Bill, yesterday there was a hearing in the state of California regarding security. Can you share with us an update on that hearing?
Very interesting conversation. A lot of questions around the topic of who's in charge in the state of California for cybersecurity initiatives, for cybersecurity follow-through, and for actually the conduct and support for cybersecurity. A lot of different opinions from an assembly perspective, from a legislative perspective, from state agency perspective. They didn't necessarily have input from the general public at large. They really ran out of time. But I think that the overarching thing that they found out was there's so many policies, laws, people in charge, organizations, and that currently within the context of California, it's all a very informal structure to support it. The real concern with that is that California is the 8th largest economy in the world. It has the most number of internet providers in the nation, and it has the most number of cybersecurity vendors in the nation. And yet it's a communal effort to protect the state. And a lot of those vendors are actually chasing the dollars associated with the federal budget outside of the state. So it was a very informative hearing with a lot of angst from the legislature yesterday.
Okay. Bill, I want to switch gears a little bit. We'll move from politics over to the university. You know, in theory, a university is a public institution. How do you lock down public access to a public institution when there is a security threat?
You can't. Everybody in the world is out to prove you wrong if you do. I mean, basically, you really have to adapt the philosophy of risk and risk mitigation in this atmosphere and understanding what that means. There is specific level 1 data. That's the way they refer to the data in California that would be PII-esque, if you will. There's specific governance and guidance on how that information is held, how it resides, and yet the differentiation of that information in the data centers and the data depositories, it's not well defined from historical reference because, again, it's a university structure. The other thing we have to deal with, which is very interesting, is that in order to do research, you have to go international to conduct that research, which means you're exposing your IPs, you're exposing your information, you're publishing, you're collecting and pulling information from a worldwide perspective. That's an absolute nightmare. And historically, until recent, we had one person in security that was both the CISO, ISO, and everything else in the structure. So formulating that response from a university perspective is extremely mind-numbing.
I can imagine. Hey, Bill, I have one last question for you. You know, many times cybersecurity is treated just as a technical response. Organizations should have a social response as well. Could you briefly comment on how Cal Poly is addressing the social side of cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely, Jimmy. This is one of the things where I actually still get to do some lecturing. So just because you're on the staff doesn't mean you have to give up lecturing. The concern I have is that in the education side and in the technical response in the field at large, we're putting all of our emphasis into the engineering technical side of the equation. So accept, if you will, for a second, the premise that we've had a technical revolution in cybersecurity. That's both good and bad guy stuff. On the social side, the revolution hasn't caught up with the technical side. So we're still not at that level of understanding. We're still not accepting that technology's role is driving social behavior. So on the social side, we see the different colleges within the university structure not teaching cybersecurity as a component. I'll give you an example. We're a Polytechnic. We teach ag. Ag has no courses currently today that cross into cybersecurity. Yet, one of the pushes we're doing from the Cybersecurity Center is to try to make all Cal Poly graduates cybersecurity cognizant, understanding that they have a role in understanding, in the deciding, the future, and the execution of good cyber awareness in their daily existence. An example of that is the utilization of things like case studies for the non-technical, so that you can understand that changing passwords and why does a target breach and all of those things, where do they apply on the non-engineering technical side of the equation?
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate your feedback. We're now going to switch over to Patrick Wheeler with Proofpoint. Patrick is the Director of Threat Intelligence. Patrick, one of the questions I have for you is, where do the majority of security attacks in government and education come from?
Sure, that's a great question. And I think We tend, interestingly, whenever I talk with reporters about, a discovery, for example, the first question, they have two questions. One, how much, how much was stolen? And then the other one is, who's doing this? Who's behind this? And we tend to really want to be able to put a name or a face or a country to it. And I think, we generally try not to get sucked into, I think it's dangerous to get sucked into trying to attribute things to a specific country, or and instead what we need to do is focus. So what I can say is that it's important to focus on the understanding that these are criminal enterprises. They can be big. You see sort of large multi-person organizations that are actually launching, that are launching, for example, the large Stridex campaigns we saw. But you also see, profit-driven small criminal organizations. So basically small shops that are actually launching smaller campaigns, using new tools, cheaper tools, et cetera. They're highly organized. They tend to rely on very distributed, very flexible infrastructures. And I think, this is really important because if we, don't get hung up on the country and focus more on the actors, it helps us understand actually not only what the appropriate response is. For example, if you know that the threat actor attacking you is a big one instead of a small one, that's actually going to tell you a lot about the tools that they're going to use, the techniques that they're going to use, and then therefore how to respond. But it also can then help you drive your response. We find that these organizations tend to really rely on infrastructure that has 5 key elements. It's not just the who. It's actually there's an actor, there's a vector, that is the way they're launching their attack. Their hosts the systems from which they're launching their attacks, or systems that they use. So IP addresses that can be used in block lists, payloads, and then also the command and control infrastructure. All of this works together to actually define, kind of the resources behind a threat actor, and therefore they can help you as an organization look at then who's attacking me, what tools are they using, and then how do I respond, and how do I protect myself in the future. So I think really that's the thing I found is probably the most useful technique or way of understanding who's behind things, is to think about it in terms of threat actors and the infrastructure that they're using, and use that to really guide both your initial response and also your mitigation and prevention efforts in the future.
Patrick, my next question for you, and this is probably very startling for a lot of people listening, but what can happen in an organization's network from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on any given day?
Yeah, that is a great question. Bill actually had a great observation. Britton had a great observation to talk about the fact that we've underemphasized the social side of cybersecurity and how it's really important to educate folks on that. And I think, what we found in the human factor, which we just published, was, that people are the key, and it's like in the television show that was on last year, the Mr. Robot. He says, people make the best exploits. And so attackers actually are optimizing, in many ways, are optimizing their attacks to actually leverage the ability of people to run exploits, to carry out their attacks, to help carry out their attacks, rather than simply relying on, for example, automated attacks or things that didn't include people. So from a timing perspective, for example, that can actually translate into really specific times in the day when campaigns tend to launch. So, for example, we see, you could summarize it that attackers are launching malicious document campaigns for breakfast and then social media spam for lunch. We see these large malicious document campaigns that were hitting a lot of organizations, including state and local governments, educational institutions. Their times to hit their targets around 9 to 10 a.m. In the target time zone. So, for example, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern. If you're targeting organizations in the Eastern U.S., 9 to 10 a.m. Pacific, if it's obviously Western organizations, and also the same thing applies to, for example, Europe and Asia. So that 9 to 10 a.m. is a really critical time for email. And you think about it from a human behavior perspective, that's when people are first kind of getting in, looking at their email, figuring out what to tackle, knocking out the easy ones first. And that's also when they're dealing with a lot of business ones. So, for example, the emails that are sent usually include, for example, invoice lures or receipt lures, things that are designed, things that people will often open and address first in their day. But then from the other thing we find is that social media follows us at a different time. So social media, the height of the peak social media interaction is actually around noon in the target time zone. So we see, if you actually look, social media spam posts, of which 9 out of 10 are actually phishing, are designed for phishing, are actually time to hit right or just ahead of the peak activity period for social media posting. So right around lunchtime in the target time zone. So I'd say that, when you're asking yourself what's going on from 10 to 3, really by 10 a.m. most of the malicious email documents for malicious document attachments have already arrived. Your users are actually beginning to look at them and trying to figure, and possibly even have already opened them. But then at lunchtime, then it's actually a matter of social media. They're interacting on social media. They're getting phished by social media spammers. And then from 3 o'clock on, we actually see a decrease not only in the messages and spam sent, but also in the effectiveness. That is, as the day goes on, people click less and less, and they open less and less of these things. So for attackers, it's really hit when people are most likely to be using these things, accessing them, and then resend the next day.
Thank you, Patrick. Our next person I'd like to speak with is Sabina Sataru. Sabina, last June, the city of Hartford completed an audit on the MIHS network security. You requested this audit. Could you please share with us, with our audience, why the audit was requested?
Well, the reason the audit was requested was I felt that I needed to get some awareness around this, and just from my telling folks needed to do something for cybersecurity wasn't enough. It needed to come from a secondary source. So we have an internal audit department, and I felt that it was a good use for our internal audit department, and it did get a lot of attention and attraction. It even got some news media because it shed some light that we had some issues. And so it was, really just a way of getting some awareness around it.
All right, thank you. The next question I have for you, what were some of the strategies going forward, as well as lessons learned, that you could share with some of the other municipalities listening into today's webinar?
Well, one of the first things that we had to do was reorganize the way we operate. Our department didn't have a security area. Security really wasn't one of our top priorities. So what I had to do first was reorganize, and we established a new area of security, and we hired staffing that, security engineer and another member of our staff to do some forensics, also security server, and that was basically the start of our roadmap to making improvements. A lot of it is baby steps and a work in progress. We are learning as we go. Some of the lessons learned that we're finding is that we can't do everything at once. We can't do everything at once. It becomes overwhelming. At first, we were looking at all of the things that we had to tackle, and we said, "Oh my gosh, what do we do first?" So we just started to document everything, and we said, "Okay, the first things, let's take the low-hanging fruit. Harden our servers. Look at what we're doing for disaster recovery. What applications can we put in the cloud that will allow us to leverage more security that way?" So those are some of the things that we started to do to address the issues that we had, but also do it in baby steps.
I have one last question for you, and I will tell you, we have from all over the country, California, Florida, Maryland, we have different K through 12 organizations listening in. Your team not only handles security for the city of Hartford, but the school system as well. What are some of the challenges that your administrators and teachers are having with technology as it relates to security and the students they teach?
Well, one of the biggest things that we hear a lot about, and we try to keep with HIPAA compliance, so we do a lot of filtering, is the teachers, students, they want to get access to different types of educational websites that are blocked. So one of the top challenges we have is trying to work with the education staff in what sites are allowable and which sites are not allowable. We've implemented tools like iBoss that help us with some of that. We also use, the other challenge that we have is the BYOD. So a lot of students bringing in their own devices. They technically are not supposed to be using them at school, but that, I'm sure other entities are having the same problem. But what we're finding is that we can implement other tools that allow us to restrict that access. We use Meraki to do that, and we're actually doing a network refresh right now under our E-rate program. So that is the system that we're implementing in the schools. So those are some of the things that we're challenged with. Cloud apps, student data, which I know that we're in Connecticut. There was just a legislative meeting that they were talking about the different apps that school districts use that are, like the shadow IT that student information is loaded into. So we'll be starting a campaign to kind of look at what applications are out there and how we can protect against the student data that's being loaded into those applications. And then the other thing is students are very savvy and they find ways around everything. And so a big thing is finding, basically putting in the restrictions of the proxies so that a lot of times they'll try to get around. They'll go to like Google foreign sites or foreign countries, but they get around it through proxies. And so we have to constantly be on top of that and be able to block that. So those are some of the major challenges that we have.
Well, I appreciate that feedback. We are now going to shift over to Elaine Starkey, who's the Chief Security Officer of the state of Delaware. Elaine, last month, the entire eastern seaboard was hit with a large snowstorm. We're going to show some pictures in a moment here that Elaine's given us to show during. You can see how intense it was. Governor Jack Markle issued a state of emergency for Delaware. The Delaware coastal towns like Rehoboth, Dewey, and Lewes had a record level of flooding. How did your team prepare for this storm in efforts to provide the citizen information regarding their safety and security? And while you answer that, I'm going to go ahead and put some of these photos up on the screen. So, Elaine, could you comment on that?
Yes, I sure can. Winter Storm Jonas turned out to be a real doozy. It was one of the worst snowstorms that we've seen here in Delaware in the last 6 years. And some parts of the state received up to 18 inches of snow, and some of our surrounding states even more than that. But what was even more concerning was the power outages and the major flooding, as you see in some of these pictures. My department did not get a snow day off. In fact, we activated our emergency operations plan several days before the first snowflake fell. Not only was it preparation for the storm, but it was also throughout the entire event. There were, things that we did like just step up the monitoring of our systems, especially those systems that are out there delivering critical public safety, public health services, citizen services like the state portal and traffic cameras and things like that. We also had staff working during the storm to provide on-site support at our traffic management center and even our own data center. We have 24/7 staffing there, so a lot of work went into being able to maintain that staffing throughout the event, contingency plans for transportation, for feeding employees that were unable to get home and things like that. So, and then the final example would be our schools. Obviously an event like this resulted in school closings and school delays, and they rely on a statewide notification system to get those alerts and those advisories out to parents and to students. So we certainly, actively monitored and assisted schools with that effort as well.
My next question for you, how does a state like Delaware close the security gap as it relates to the human factor side of things?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because we recognize that, people are our greatest asset for sure. In any organization, I think, says that. But when it comes to information security, they are also the weakest link in the chain, as we heard earlier with the statistics from Proofpoint. So, and then that's exactly why awareness and education and training, they're just literally the cornerstone of Delaware's program since we started the program 10 years ago. It's what we started with. It's what we continue in a very significant way going forward. We have a real active campaign all year long. It includes, all types of communications to our employees on a regular basis, training sessions. We're just looking to keep them engaged and thinking about security as they go about their daily routine. So we ask every new employee, we don't ask them, we require them to complete online security awareness training. That has to happen in their first 30 days of employment before any bad habits start to develop. And then all of our other employees, we're on an annual cycle, so they complete the training every year. We refresh and change up the content of the training every year. We also run an email phishing program where we send employees like simulated emails. We encourage them to, we don't encourage them, but the email tries to lure them into clicking on the link or opening an attachment or entering their credentials, whatever the case might be. And then for those that fall for the phish, we present them with an education screen immediately, and then we do additional follow-up through our information security officers too. And there's that level of training. There's also technical training too, like CISS boot camps and other certifications to really just build up the security savviness of our workforce. That's our overall objective. And then finally, we practice something bad happening. We do that on a regular basis by running cyber exercises and other exercises to test us, to test our ability to detect and respond and recover from some type of large-scale cyber attack.
That is an excellent idea. Elaine, I have one last question for you. We live in a day and age where everyone has multiple devices. I would imagine everyone listening to us either has a computer and laptop, a cell phone, and maybe some kind of pad or tablet. How does Delaware deal with the BYOD, bring your own device issue?
Yeah, it is a challenge. You're right. And what we do is we offer wireless connections in many of our state offices, and they're segmented and they're secured to provide that separation, by agency. But employees that connect to the state wireless, they use their Active Directory credentials, and so they're subject to the same kind of content filtering that they might be subject to on their desktop computer. We offer wireless GuestNet connections as well in many state offices. That's not so much for the employees as it is for our citizens. As an example, a customer waiting in our motor vehicle department, waiting in the lobby, they would have access to GuestNet, and that's totally segmented and separate from the state network. And for those employees that want to use their personally owned device to also get access to their state mail or their calendar, the way we manage that is that all the employee-owned smartphones and tablets, they have to meet a minimum of 7 different security controls, and those are controls around their passwords. First of all, they have to have a passcode on that device. They have to have strong passwords if the device allows that. There's the password expiration and it retains history. If there's some type of inactivity timeout, it locks automatically. If they have so many failed attempts to log in, we also lock it out. And then finally, we can if the device is lost or stolen, we have the ability to remotely wipe that device as well. So, our bottom line there is, the smartphones are here to stay, and they're just a part of our world, and they're going to continue to be, but we need to wrap smart security around it, especially when they're connecting to state networks.
Thank you, Elaine. Next, I'd like to ask Jim Garrett, Chief Information Security Officer from the state of New York, a few questions. Jim, in your view, which are the most concerning hacker threats to your organization right now?
Well, I think the threats I'll speak to here are similar threats to most organizations in the industry, and that is the phishing threat, which appears to be more and more insidious every year, where the hackers are preying on either your personal knowledge or behaviors, or some seasonal event that's going on, whether it's tax season or a holiday. And it used to be that you could recognize phishing events pretty easily because there were syntax errors or spelling errors, and but they're becoming crafted pretty good now, so that they can include what looks like legitimate logos of either banks or institutions, and it's very hard to detect. The other one is the drive-by threat. So folks going to the internet and surfing, they may go to a site that appears legitimate and click on a link or download it could be maybe some open source code, or maybe it's a music file or a video file, and that would contain malware within that file. So that's a real issue. And then within each one of those phishing or the drive-by, there's that zero-day threat, which is really how those.
My second question for you, I wanted to talk about this. I'm going to put it up on the screen so everyone else can see it, but I'd like to talk a little bit about zero day, and if you could go ahead and elaborate on that, please.
So the zero day is that type of threat or malware code that hasn't been detected by an automated solution. So antivirus doesn't readily detect it, or your intrusion detection or intrusion prevention system doesn't detect it. So what hackers do is they can sometimes take an old virus or malware and rewrap it so that it's not detected, or maybe encrypted so it's not detectable, and they send that or wrap that in the phishing or drive-by download. And the download may look like a Word document, it could look like an executable, but really embedded in that is that malware. And that zero day. Another form of zero day that really is not being crafted by the hacker, but is just a byproduct of the technology age that we're in, are those bugs that we're now seeing in our infrastructure and software tools that we use, such as, it could be, and I hate to use names, but it could be a Cisco router, it could be a Juniper IDS system or firewall, it can be, we saw the SSL vulnerability that required us to upgrade to TLS, and these have been out for a long time. Many since 2000, early in 2000, 2005, 2008, but they're just being discovered by researchers. So what the researchers do to maybe glorify or to certainly prove that the hack is out there is they publish what the vulnerability is, and many times they'll publish the exploit. So the hacker community doesn't even know that that exploit exists, but the researcher publishes it, and voila, you've got sort of a ready-made zero day. And now the exercise is patching as fast as you can to stay in front of it. So those, in our world, that's because we have such a complex technology environment in all the agencies. We've got just about every technology that's out there. So when we get these patches that come from vendors, we really have to get in front of that quickly.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Brent Nair, Chief Information Officer for the City of Memphis, Tennessee. Brent, the City of Memphis employs over 8,000 people. How does your organization protect your employees from security threats?
I think we do the same items that everyone has already mentioned, whether it was Elaine, who actually sounds a lot like almost what we do, you know, standard defense in depth. But we really spend a lot of time and effort. Jim, is there an echo gremlin on there? I thought I had mine muted, so let me double check to make sure.
I am not hearing anything on my end, but if I would just ask all the speakers, panelists, if you could just mute your phones and make sure you're muted on your dashboard, you should be good. But I'm not picking up anything on my end, so
okay, sorry about that for a second.
Please continue.
So we spend a lot of time on information security education and awareness. I think that, you know, to me, that's probably the best bang for the buck that we can spend. Of course, we go out and we secure our perimeter, we secure our DMZs, we secure all of that. However, again, it's the interior, or it's the individual that more than likely could be and is our weakest link. We do, again, mandatory training upon hire. We do anti-phishing campaigns, and we actually test that with both internal and external audits. And we do brown bag lunches, where we have once a month information security topics spread throughout the city at various locations. One of the unique things about a municipality, and most everyone that works in this space knows this, is that we are all, any and all information, with the exception of what's, PII, is open record. So a citizen can request, anyone's email. A citizen can request information about certain meetings and cell phone records and things of those nature. So we protect what we consider the jewels, and then leave the rest, if needed be, for open records.
Thank you. This next question is a very interesting one that actually came in. We've actually had someone ask this, we've had a couple people ask this through the dashboard, but please comment on how to handle public record email requests from your organization's infrastructure is in a Microsoft Office 365 cloud.
Great. We started the migration to Microsoft Hosted Exchange, or Microsoft Cloud, and as part of that, the package that we purchased has their built-in e-discovery archiving solution. Previously, we used a third-party vendor where we would journal every email transaction in and out of the store, and that in turn then would be sent over, and it was stored in a SQL database, and the third party did it. So right now we're in transitioning between the two. So we use the built-in product, and actually it's been working really well for us. We haven't had any issues, knock on wood, with that. The main problem is the amount of time going through and doing redaction. Our legal team takes a different approach maybe than any others, is that they spend the time, and they like to almost hand redact using a PDF editing tool. So they go through some different actions than other legal staffs may go through in other either municipalities and or government agency. But that's how we handle the email requests, open records for that information, or that email that's in the cloud.
Thank you, Britt. Before I go to Michael Rolling, Chief Information Security Officer with the state of Missouri, we're about at noon Pacific time, 3 o'clock Eastern. I'm going to go through a couple sets of questions for Michael, Dan, and Stephanie. And our audience has stayed with us this whole time. I haven't seen anyone move, and we'll stay a few minutes extra. I know we'll try to get some of those questions on, but I wanted to just be mindful of the time as well. Michael, we have a national audience listening into today's webcast. Many of us followed the story last year regarding Ferguson. Can you share with us how your organization dealt with the security issues surrounding the systems from both a technical and human factor viewpoint?
Absolutely. I'm going to start out first talking about the human factor. As it's been said by several other panelists, cybersecurity is truly a human issue. And for us, back in the fall of 2014, we fully experienced that, from the physical aspect of what was happening in the city of Ferguson to the cyber aspect, to what we and a lot of local municipalities in Missouri had to deal with. Anonymous, as we all know, is just a group of people, and they were leveraging various attacks from social engineering. We had anonymous actors try to become friends with high-level executives on Facebook. We had insider threats, which was perhaps the most scariest from my chair, in that we had someone on the inside with full access, but sympathized with the anonymous cause and what they were trying to do. So it's very, very human. It's very real. And also, throughout the Ferguson events, we had our eye on social media, watching what people were saying. It was perhaps one of our best sources of real-time threat intel, to keep an eye on what Anonymous was doing, what were sympathizers doing, and it helped us gear up our defenses. And with that, I'm going to lean into the technical side of the conversation. We had basically the kitchen sink thrown at us for about a 3-month period. Within those 3 months, there was about 2 weeks where the state of Missouri and the local governments within Missouri, we were the #1 hacktivist target. And we saw everything from your run-of-the-mill DDoS attacks, using TCP SYN floods, ICMP floods, reflective DNS attacks, the whole 9 yards in terms of DDoS attacks. We partnered. I wish we would have partnered earlier. It's very difficult to establish a contract at midnight on a Saturday. So if there's one thing I want to share with everyone is partner early. Get ahead of it, because you don't want to be doing it in the middle of it. Other things we saw: SQL injection attacks across the board. Obviously, malware. We were at a different level in terms of that. And throughout all of this, we were implementing defenses for each one of these categories. And that also included rolling out two-factor authentication for remote access. As we saw, that was a huge issue for Office of Personnel Management. And I was very happy that we were able to get that rolled out in an expedited fashion.
Michael, I have one other question for you, and I appreciate you giving us the insight into that. As you look into this year and the future, I mean, as you mentioned, you were probably the #1 targeted group for a while there. Where do you see the top security threats coming from in public sector as you're looking down the road and into the year and the future?
Well, I continue to see hacktivists as a nuisance. Any powder keg situation, around the country, Anonymous will be there, doing what they do, and so they will continue to be a threat, and I foresee that threat growing. Cybercrime, it's really what we deal with perhaps the most with the state of Missouri. It's fairly easy to detect that it's a cyber gang, because they're trying to exfiltrate credentials and they're looking for credit card information and other aspects. Insider threats, to me, like I mentioned earlier, that's perhaps the scariest thing that a CISO has to address, because they have access to everything. They're already within the network, but it's very difficult to detect. That's a very challenging thing to do. And then I can't leave out nation states. We have seen some evidence of nation state activity targeted against Missouri, and the issue we all face there is they have the collective intelligence of an army in many situations, and their attacks are extremely sophisticated and obviously very persistent. So I see those as our top threats.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that insight. And wow, I have so many questions. I'm going to save it for the audience, but I appreciate you sharing, what happened with Ferguson and how you all dealt with it. We're going to now go to Stephanie Cervantes. Stephanie is a retired chief IT security officer from the state of California. She worked with the Department of Justice and a handful of other agencies. She currently is now working with LinkSource Technologies in Roseville, California as a security strategist. Stephanie, first question I have for you. Last summer, the state of California had a security audit by Elaine Howe. In her report, she states, this report represents the result of our high-risk audit concerning weaknesses in the controls over the state's information systems. California's government agencies maintain an extensive range of confidential and sensitive data, including social security numbers, health records, and income tax information. In the past few years, retailers, financial institutions, and government agencies have increasingly fallen victim to cyber attacks. If unauthorized parties were to gain access to the state's information systems, the cost both to the state and to the individuals involved could be enormous. Please comment on this.
Okay, great question, Jimmy. As Bill earlier stated from yesterday's hearing, security is something that California has been very concerned with over the last several years, and I'm not surprised to hear that they are having some issues with who does what. But in response to Elaine Howe's audit, what it did was identify a lack of compliance for security best practices, found most of California state agencies and departments being non-compliant, which puts the PII and confidential information at risk. But I don't really think that this audit went far enough. The report called out the Department of Technology's need for more oversight, along with the need for ongoing risk-based audit programs and site visits. She also recommended that the California legislature redirect funds that are legally available to non-compliant agencies or departments to help them remediate any information security weaknesses, with the big if there are funds available. In my opinion, more audits and compliance checks don't always equal better security. You can be compliant today, you can make a change on the network, an hour later or tomorrow install new hardware, firmware, connect with a new partner, open an email, etc., and you can still technically be compliant, but your security has gone out the window with the new hole that some of those vulnerabilities introduced in any of those scenarios.
Thank you.
While security audits are very important, compliance and standards are important, and well-planned security architecture are also important. In my mind, what the execs and oftentimes the security people overlook or discount is having a constant, continual view of what is happening on the network, along with well-qualified security analysts who have the ability to think like a hacker while they're watching the network. If they're thinking like a hacker, they can identify disparate pieces of data that could indicate a hack has happened or is about to. And ideally, they can respond within minutes, not the national average of 215 days out, typically when law enforcement comes knocking on your door. And also keep in mind that if you're not attacked, you may be, and you want to be able to quickly identify an attack and respond to it. So while her report, lines out the compliance aspect, I think that you have to acknowledge that any system can be hacked. Compliance checks simply won't do that. They're good for drawing attention to what needs to be enhanced in security, and which will hopefully respond with more funds and resources directed towards security.
Thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie, I just have two more quick questions for you. During your career at the state of California, DOJ, CalPERS, the Controller's Office, as well as Board of Equalization, share with us, lesson learned and some success stories as it relates to security.
Well, again, a lot of that in those arenas, the most important thing I've learned is that, as Patrick and Elaine and Michael and the other panelists pointed out, people are your best and your worst parts of security. And along with continual security testing, it's vital for any network and internet exposure. While it's important to have good written and technical policies in place, user awareness training, well-architected networks, and the best-breed security appliances, many times it's the people and what they do or what they don't do that is overlooked. So most of us realize that an employee can open an email and unleash serious malware to the network, but what many execs and IT officers often forget, that one piece of miswritten or weak code can open the door to an attack or a breach of your data. In my mind, that's why it's important to do security testing whenever you have a new line of code introduced, changed, whenever you're bringing up a new web service, making connections to that, or establishing some other type of change on the network. And again, humans are part of that testing. While tools are really good, it's actually the people that are running the tools that are most valuable. Having an analyst in place, I found, that can do the ethical hacking can cut down on the time it takes to test. Also weed through the false positives that sometimes security testing tools generate. So in my experience doing this type of testing while overseeing the security for a large ERP and other new web applications, some of them in the law enforcement arena, has allowed us, my team, to find miswritten code, which had it gone unfixed, could have led to a hack. Things, that could have led to a SQL injection and a SYNFLED attack, etc. So again, those were some of my experiences.
Stephanie, one last question for you. In addition to all the federal, state, county, and city governments listening in today, as well as K through 12, we have a lot of folks from the vendor community. And could you, since retiring from service for the state of California, you've gone to work for a security consultant with Link Source Technology. Could you share with us, for all the vendor organizations listening, what is your perspective on how the vendor community can better inform government decision makers? What does government dislike when getting approached by the vendor community with a security solution?
Okay, great question. In my career, I've always been inclined to make time to talk to the vendors or meet a vendor who's first taken the time to understand the environment that the state operates in, such as the networks with older technologies, legacy systems that won't be replaced for a long time, and the small IT and security budgets that they have for new technologies, along with the small staff. A vendor that takes the time to educate the government decision makers on the security threats and work with them in finding the right fit for their specific network and threat vector is very important. Because a vendor that comes in saying that everything is old, junk, or needs to go, or a vendor that has too much of a cutting edge technology normally doesn't do well in the public sector. They don't want to be in the headline because they've selected something that's on the bleeding edge. Mm-hmm. So you've got to understand that government can't rip things out and start over. The decision makers don't want to be beta testers by implementing a new tool that's not got at least a little bit of a proven track record or sounds too far out. They're also slow to move on decisions because of the budget cycles, and a lot of times because they don't really understand the threat vector clearly or the technology. So that's where the vendor education and the relationship comes in. Establishing that good relationship with the public sector IT and security staff is very important, along with being a go-to resource for any questions or education or sounding block that they may need. And from those relationships, I found that trust is built and the needed solutions get put into place without wasting tax dollars on solutions that don't fit within the government environment or the technical architecture.
Thank you, Stephanie. I just want a quick announcement. I understand we're right at quarter after the hour. I see by our audience, everyone is staying. This has probably been one of the most riveting and fascinating discussions we've had. I have a couple questions for Dan Kern, and then I'm going to ask our panelists if they could stay on maybe another 10 minutes, and we'll try to get to a couple of the questions coming in from the audience. There are quite a few of them. And like I said, our entire audience has been with us the whole hour. No one's budging, so I can tell everyone's excited and interested in hearing what you all have to say. Dan, my first question would be for you is how do you involve key stakeholders in your county's security matters?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll be super brief, but we constantly educate that risk is a business decision and that it's our role to be a subject matter expert and advisor to the business on security issues, and also letting them know that we're on their side. In other words, we're kind of like their security attorneys. So when an issue arises, we want to provide them with a clear statement of the threats and the vulnerabilities and especially the probabilities and the business impact, and also maybe alternative ways to meet the business need if that's necessary, so that the business can make an educated decision. If it's a technical vulnerability, we can often demonstrate for them what can happen, and we found that to be a real eye-opener. We also focus on telling IT technical staff to never make risk decisions on behalf of the business, to always engage the information owners and obtain written authorization. That way, if something bad happens, they're not caught without a chair when the music stops.
Thanks, Dan. I also encourage everyone out there. Dan has a great blog. It was in his bio. It's actually out on our website. I encourage you to read him. He has some very interesting articles on there. Dan, the question I have for you is security, when it comes down to it, it's a human issue. How do you help your county translate the technical to what can be possible as it relates to security and the human factor?
Yeah, one of the things that we do here is we do live security awareness training, and we include in that training hacking demos and targeted attack demos, and we found that these really open the eyes of those who aren't technical into seeing what it's possible. So they actually get to see how they, as the human operating system, are the target and the easiest way to get into a network. And as you mentioned, you can find some of those videos on YouTube. We also focus on teaching people to protect themselves, which really makes them perk up and listen more than we found alternative ways of teaching. And we found that that teaching in that way spills over into their work habits as well. We also do things like demonstrating our tools and techniques that we use to determine different things, like, for example, a link, or if a link or an attachment is safe. People really love learning techniques and obtaining tools to help themselves. And so as a result, our submission rate of suspicious emails has gone through the roof. People are becoming more and more suspicious, which is a really good thing.
Thank you, Dan. We are now to the part of the program. We're going to spend just a few minutes here. I know we're running a little late, but like I said, this has been an excellent discussion and just phenomenal insights these experts have given us. I'm going to now take some questions from the audience. This first question that came in, I will tell you, is downright frightening. And the question is, can people read your camera in social settings? So if I'm out with my iPhone or my iPad, can people read that? I'm going to ask Bill Britton to comment on that. Bill.
I'm sorry, Jim.
No, not a problem. Now, Bill, the question that came in is, can people read your camera in social settings?
Oh, good grief. So this is one of the things that we talked about that's really dangerous, if you would. In the world of the academic world with students, we have social groups, a white hat club that meets. And they talk about white hat events as good hacker activity. But what's interesting is, in order to prove the validity of a good hacker, they talk about some of the bad tactics and bad things you can do. So they kind of, on a social level, teach each other things like, how do you get into someone's camera on their laptop, iPhone, et al. And that's in a social setting. So instead of sitting around the table having a beer and talking about school, they're sitting around the table having a soda and talking about how you hack into somebody else's system and look at what's going on through their camera.
That is very frightening. Would anyone else on the panel care to comment on that?
This is Patrick. I would say that one thing that we're finding in addition to that is we tend to think of attacks as coming through, for example, open ports and services. But in the mobile realm, one of the things that we're finding is a real threat is the mobile apps themselves. So these apps, whether users get them even sometimes from official app stores or from kind of rogue or third-party app stores, is the apps themselves can sometimes get very low-level access to a lot of different resources, including microphone and camera on these phones. So I think when you're thinking about phone and tablet security, don't just think in terms of services that are running and that are accessible immediately in your immediate vicinity, but also think in terms of what apps on your phone actually have, or on your device, have access to the microphone, the camera, but also to think the ability to send text messages, the ability to make calls and other functions.
Thank you, Patrick. We are getting a little bit of an echo on the line. We just need everyone to double check. You need to make sure that your phone button is clicked on the audio and you have your phone muted. That's typically where the echo is coming from. Next question we have coming in is for Michael Rowling. Michael, could you share with us, you had mentioned during the Ferguson attack that you actually had people on the inside that were providing hackers information. Could you comment on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So the individual sympathized with the campaign that was going on at the time, the operation, the anonymous operation. And we first became aware of the individual because she used certain keywords in Twitter. We were monitoring hashtags and other keywords. Twitter has a public API for searching, and we were doing our best to keep our eye on the situation. And then we realized, oh, she's actually talking about network connectivity as a state employee. And then, continuing the investigation, we realized, wow, she works for this particular agency, and she's in that particular role. Within weeks later, the next thing we know is the Twitter profile photo. She's wearing a Guy Fawkes mask, and yeah, it was a very scary situation, But when it comes down to it, what was she legally doing wrong? She wasn't actually sharing information like state sensitive data or anything like that. She wasn't breaking any laws. She wasn't violating any HR rules. So it was a very difficult situation. While I viewed that particular person as a very specific acute threat, in reality I couldn't do anything other than monitor her activity on social media, just waiting for that moment. So it was a challenge.
Jimmy, this is Bill Britton again. If I could add an adage that we've been adding to a couple of our lectures, particularly in social media. The old adage that the pen is mightier than the sword?
I do know it well, especially as an author. I believe in it.
So one of the things that we've been talking about is on the social side that the internet is mightier than the atomic bomb. The context that things that are published, things that are expressed, go to such a wide and varied audience in such an instantaneous manner, and that there's really no thought process or very little thought process about putting it out there. And then how is it monitored and who's using it? So much like Michael said, the amount of things that they found out that were corollary to the circumstance in the event, the first shooters and how they have potential manifestos and all of these things are something that at the college and university level we're absolutely paranoid to death about. Hate crimes, statements of hate, and other things on a website. You just can't ignore them anymore. You have to know they're there, and you have to do something about it. That's creating quite a stir, because that's not been something historically universities and their police departments and college departments really think about or worry about.
Well, yeah, and I would imagine too, the budget is changing what you give, just say to law enforcement, I imagine is it growing what goes into the budgets for cybersecurity? Is it still relatively low?
Or I'll speak for here. There is no cyber budget in the police department on campus, period.
Okay, that is interesting. Hey, to everyone listening, I want to thank our audience who has stayed with us this entire time. I know we're running a little bit late. I would ask, we're at the part of the program. We're going to get ready to wrap up. We have probably another 15 questions that we just don't have time to get to. And I promise next event we do, we'll make it a little bit longer for everyone. But I would ask each of our panelists if any of you have any closing comments you would like to share with our audience listening in. If you could do that now, and we'll just maybe go around the horn real quick before we conclude. Jim, do you have any closing comments?
Who did you ask? Jim Garrett?
Yes, Jim Garrett.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we still continue to remain vigilant and cross the cybersecurity space. It's a big and exciting field, and we're in the front of protecting citizen data, managing a lot of cutting-edge issues around privacy and policy on behaviors in the workplace, et cetera. And so I think we have to do our best and balance what's right for the individual and what's right for the company and the institution. A hard task, but it's very exciting, very rewarding when we see that we're effective.
Thank you. Brent, closing comments for today.
Yeah, I think overall we have to educate everyone that cybersecurity is a personal responsibility. You don't leave your doors unlocked at your house. You don't leave your windows open. If you have an alarm, you turn it on. All of those things that we do today in our environment to help protect ourselves against physical crime, we need to do the same in an electronic or digital age. So we have to make sure that everyone understands that cybersecurity is their business, not just those chosen few that are in the field.
Well said, well said. Michael, closing comments, please.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. I would say partner early and partner often. Not just with the great vendors out there that have amazing solutions, but within your vertical, so within your industry, because they're all facing the same attacks. And with state governments, we try to partner with local as much as we can, and our National Guard, and critical infrastructure partners. I feel that's very important. So when it does happen, everyone's prepared.
Stephanie, closing comments for our audience.
Well, I would agree. It's been a great discussion today. Education, very key component. Testing, watching, and then reporting and sharing are all very critical. So those would be my takeaways.
Thank you. Dan, closing comments.
Yeah, I would agree with the others that the easiest way to get inside of a network is through the chair to keyboard connector. And once you get inside of a network, you actually have the ability to become that person. So it's really important then to look for odd behavior on a network where legitimate accounts are used, because hackers will try to steal legitimate accounts and move around inside of the network and try to look like everyone else. So look for things out of place, like PowerShell running on workstations when it doesn't normally run that sort of thing.
Thank you, Dan. And I encourage everyone listening, check out Dan's blog. Elaine, closing comments.
Yeah, Jimmy, I would just say I would actually like to springboard off of something that Sabina said earlier about her work in Hartford, where she said it's a work in progress. And I bet every one of us on this panel would agree about that, about our own organization, that this is a work in progress. There's no finish line. I tell my team, they'll never hear me say that we've done everything that we can do. And I guess that's the beauty of it. There's no better time to be in the information security field than now.
Thank you. Sabina, closing comments.
And thank you, Elaine. And thank you, everyone, for having me on this panel. It was very informative. Panels like this, I think, are a wonderful platform for us as peers and others within, the government and education area to hear from others and be able to learn what best practices are out there, because this is always going to be a learning experience. So I guess my takeaway is that, we're just going to keep learning and growing from, this area of cybersecurity, because it's always going to change. So that's my takeaway.
Sabina. Patrick, closing comments for our audience.
Great, no, thank you. I mean, everybody, the rest of the panelists really hit it on the head. The attackers understand that people are the key, and you need to think about all the ways that they're going to try to get to your users and and trick them into basically taking actions that are going to bypass all the defenses that you've worked hard to put in place. So understand that and focus on that, and also then how to mitigate when they do. So that's it. But yeah, there is no finish line, as Elaine said. It's a constant struggle.
And last, Bill, closing comments for us before we adjourn today's webinar.
What I would say that's for my closing part is, first of all, thank you all very much, and particularly you, Jimmy, for setting this up and letting us have this place to vocalize some of our issues and concerns and soapbox, if you will. And on the term of soapbox, I think the thing we are losing sight of is the workforce shortage that we keep talking about in cybersecurity is not just a technical shortage. It's on people who, I tell you, you can buy all the technology in the world, but if they keep reading the phishing attacks and keep reading the emails, that technology is not doing you a whole lot of good. So we've got to find a way to organize and better train than the annual security refresher, the workforce that we deal with.
Thank you, Bill. Again, I'd like to thank our esteemed panel of technology experts from government, industry, and higher education. I found you all brilliant today. The discussion was certainly riveting. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Proofpoint. I encourage everyone to download their cybercrime report. If you could, when we adjourn this webinar, kindly take a few minutes. I appreciate everyone that stayed with us to fill out the survey. Also, we have some upcoming events with the Public Sector Technology Exchange that you might be interested in, and we'll certainly keep you all informed of those. To learn more, you can contact me or visit us on the web. And again, I want to thank you for attending Hackers and the Human Factor Security in Your Department in 2016 webinar. I'm James Baker. Make it a great day.